An Erios original.
Hello, and welcome to Web Crawlers, the podcast where we do a deep dive into some of our favorite mysteries. Each week, we will introduce our topic, lay out our research and findings, reveal some conspiracy theories, and conclude with our own hypothesis. I am Allie Siegel.
I am Melissa Stettin.
And I, producer Maria.
Melissa, who are our patrons for today?
We've got R. Olive, Hillary, Quinn, and Amanda.
Hi, guys. Welcome to the team. We're so happy to have you.
Okay.
I don't know. It's going to be a boss dog day. Today's episode, so I think on a mailbag episode, maybe it was last week or the week before, someone called in and said that they were related to a woman who had been murdered during the Salem Witch Trials. She was accused of witchcraft and had been hanged. I can't remember, unfortunately, the name.
Elizabeth something.
Okay. And that really inspired us, God rest her soul, that inspired us to do a whole episode on the Salem Witch Trials. Maria, what's like hilarious to you?
Your tweet to me.
Oh.
I literally was on Twitter and I just wrote a tweet before we started and I almost even mentioned you going like, Allie's gonna hate this. And I literally just like opened my Twitter and I just see a tweet from Allie to me that just she wrote, "This is embarrassing."
Yeah.
What did you tweet?
Well, it's one of her classic tweets. Maria, read your tweet.
I asked a very sincere question.
Read it verbatim. And
looking for a really good ground coffee for a standard
yeah.
standard coffee machine that isn't
Standard.
bitter, for hashtag recipes, because I don't want anyone thinking I need like pour over. I'm not pour over. I just need like something to put in the coffee mate.
Yeah, embarrassing. You couldn't even get through it without laughing.
I need help.
Intelligentsia.
That's not bitter. I feel like that's going to be like bitter. It's not?
No.
Okay. All right. God forbid a woman ask for a little help.
Yeah, that's okay. Fair, right angle. Okay. And we're going to really be discussing
God forbid.
women today. In the Salem Witch Trials. We also have two incredible guests. We're so lucky. We have Marilynne Roach, who is a Salem scholar, and she is author of 6 Women of Salem, the untold story of the accused and their accusers in the Salem Witch Trials. Also super cool, she was a member of the Gallows Project, which was a group of like archaeologists or anthropologists who helped to find the correct site of the 1692 hangings.
Ooh.
Really cool stuff. And then we also have amazing Rachel Christ, who is director of education at the Salem Museum. So we're going to get to ask them some in-depth questions about these Salem Witch Trials as well. So first things first, let's do a quick web crawler's history of the Salem Witch Trials. Yeah, uh-oh.
Get ready.
This just means I look through Wikipedia and other websites, copied and pasted, and then I just get to put it in my own words on the fly.
That's essentially what a podcast is, baby.
And away we go. So we all know, or most of us know, the Salem Witch Trials were in 1692 and 1693 in colonial Massachusetts, started in Salem. More than 200 people were accused of witchcraft. I read that it's something like 78% of those people were, of course, women, which is interesting. I want to ask one of our guests later about that. 30 were found guilty and 19 were executed by hanging.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
There's like burned at the stake. Where did that come from? If they were any of them burned?
That's what's interesting is I didn't see any of that in any of the research. So we should ask that as well. And then also I've heard a lot of stuff about like if they would throw them in a river and if they floated, then they were, that meant that they were witches. I didn't see that in any of the evidence during the trials as well. So those are definite questions that we should ask. So here is how it all started. In January of 1692, these two little girls, a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old named Betty Paris and an 11-year-old named Abigail Williams. They were the daughter and the niece of the minister in Salem Village, this guy, Reverend Samuel Paris. All of a sudden, they fell ill. They were making strange sounds. They were like hiding under the furniture. They were clutching their heads. They were having like epileptic fits. They were saying that like invisible forces were pinching them. They were basically freaking out. Prayer wasn't working to heal them. Medicine wasn't working to heal them. A doctor came to the house and said, the only explanation here is that it must be witchcraft.
Wow.
Yeah. Then that's kind of how this whole thing started. The first 3 people who were accused of allegedly being witches were Ann Putnam Jr., Elizabeth Hubbard, Sarah Good. This is more than 3 people, excuse me. Sarah Osborne and Tituba. And Tituba was, unfortunately, the slave of the Paris family. One thing that is kind of interesting is that there was a real family rivalry between the Paris family and the Putnam family. It went through like the Salem Village. Like people felt like they had to choose sides between like Reverend Samuel Paris and his family and the Putnam family. So one theory that maybe we can get into later was this kind of a family dispute where Samuel Paris might have told his daughter like, hey, I want you to act a fool. And then why don't you accuse this other family's daughter of witchcraft or something like that. So like,
oh, like she did this to me. It was her.
Yeah, like it was just like
her.
Yeah, like a squabble between the 2 kids. Like Samuel Paris's daughter accused the Putnam's daughter of like witchcraft or like, you know, taunting her, and then it exploded into this whole witchcraft phenomenon of mass hysteria.
This is wild that the Crucible, the play, all of these characters are in that play. And
yeah,
that's like
I've never seen it.
Really is.
It's crazy, right?
Wasn't Winona Ryder in the film?
She was with
Daniel
Keanu.
Day-Lewis.
Oh, was it Daniel Day-Lewis?
Who's in the cruise? Hold on, everyone, calm down. We're gonna get there.
I gotta know right now, Maria.
I have to
know. No, just hold on. I gotta type in movie. I didn't type in movie. Daniel Day-Lewis. Winona Ryder plays Abigail Williams.
Oh, I gotta give that a watch.
Gotta give that a gander.
And Daniel Day-Lewis plays John Proctor.
I love a D.D. Lewis.
I did watch a Lifetime movie starring Kirstie Alley to
probably just as good.
Yeah, which was phenomenal. But unfortunately, I turned it off.
I don't blame you.
It didn't really resonate with me. Anyways, one thing that's kind of interesting about the women who were initially accused, they all had kind of less than stellar reputations within the community.
Mm-hmm. Easy targets.
Easy targets, yes. Sarah Osborne didn't attend church regularly. She had been remarried once. Tituba was obviously of a different race than the rest of the community, so was also an easy target. I believe that they said that Sarah Good had quote unquote like loose morals.
So she was fun.
Yeah, so she was a true
cool
web crawler's bimbo. So it's interesting to note, at least at first, the type of women who were being accused.
Right, these weren't like the saints of the village, like the goody two-shoes
Could
girls.
this also potentially have just been a attempt to purify the community of people who they thought were, less than savory members? Which leads me to, what is Puritanism? The community was a Puritan community. They had obviously come from England and set up in Salem, Massachusetts. They were Puritans. They had left England because they had thought that the Church of England was not fully reformed. They thought it should be more Protestant. They wanted to purify and regulate the church and have it be basically like more strict. And so these were very like pious people who really want to live by the Bible. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting in my research is that it actually says in the Bible, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," which I did not know. It's Exodus 22:18 in the King James Bible.
In the LeBron James Bible?
In the LeBron James Bible, in the Space Jam 2 Bible. It says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Whoever lieth with a beast shall surely be put to death. He that sacrificed unto any god, save unto the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed." However, so I guess obviously they were taking this literally. However, there is obviously some dispute as to whether or not the word witch is translated properly.
Oh.
So I got this from Haaretz.com, which is a website, which I assume is of Jewish origin. Okay, so it says the original Hebrew word used in Exodus that they translated as witch is called Mekhashepa. And excuse me if I'm pronouncing any of this wrong. I haven't spoken Hebrew since my bat mitzvah. Mekhashepa. So it says that Mekhashepa was originally translated into pharmakeia. A lecturer in biblical studies translated pharmakeia to herbalist. So...
Oh.
Kitchen witch.
Kitchen witch.
Sandwich.
Sandwich.
Sandwich. So some people were like, okay, so this word means witch. Other people think that pharmakeia could be poisoner. So anyone who potentially murders or poisons someone else should be put to death, is what the other
So they're saying like anyone who knows how to like mix up some like herbs and mushrooms to kill anyone who like knows what's up in the forest
should die.
Is a witch.
Yeah. But they like some people say that the word witch should even be taken out of it, that it should be poisoners. Thou shalt not suffer a poisoner to live. So anyone who poisons someone else should die, which like during these times, like think about it, they're like poisoning was one of the main ways that people would kill other people. An interesting take that maybe witch was never even the word that was in the Bible. It was just poisoners. However, whoever lieth with a beast shall surely be put to death is obviously I'm sure reference to the devil, or it could be a reference to bestiality. I mean, I don't know.
Cool.
Yeah. Sick as hell. Anyways, also going back to how the majority of the people accused were women, while they did believe that women and men were like, I guess, equal in the eyes of God, although who knows if that's really true, they did think that women were inherently more sinful. You know, the devil was more likely to tempt a woman than he was to tempt a man. Like garden.
Because of Adam and Eve.
Yeah, Garden of Eden shit. So it was not totally surprising that they thought that it was these mostly women who had been tempted by the devil and led to witchcraft rather than men. It was just more probable. That's what kind of they had in their minds already. So let's talk about Salem at the time. The governor was this dude, Sir William Phipps. The chief justice was this guy, William Stoughton, and he presided over the trials. And then there were these judges named Hawthorne, Samuel Sewall, and William Stoughton, who I mentioned he was a chief justice. Then there was this guy, Samuel Parris. He was the minister, the Puritan minister. The Puritan minister.
Puritan mister.
He was a Puritan minister. He was also the father and uncle of two of the afflicted girls, which is kind of interesting that the guy who is the minister of
weird.
the Salem colony also kind of kicks off this whole chain of events with his niece and his daughter being like, we're possessed. This is who's doing it.
Sure,
people without
you are.
morals. Yeah. Also, there's a lot of other stuff going on at the time which could have contributed to this. This is from the Salem Witch Museum website. It says, to understand the events of the Salem Witch Trials, it is necessary to examine the times in which accusations of witchcraft occurred. There was the ordinary stresses of 17th century life in Massachusetts Bay Colony, a strong belief in the devil, a recent smallpox epidemic, and the threat of attack by warring tribes created by fertile ground for fear and suspicion. This was made worse by a growing factional conflict in Salem Village. The village rivalry.
Whoa.
No, oh no.
Malfunction.
That's embarrassing. The village's rivalry with a nearby Salem town and the removal of the Massachusetts Bay Charter in 1684, which left the colony in a state of fear and confusion. To many, it seemed that the Puritan ideal of a city on a hill. Oh my God.
On a heel. A city on a heel.
I'm like,
a city on a heel.
Or a city on a heel.
City on a hill was slipping away, and that their decades of work were suddenly being pulled away from their grasp. Many wondered if it was perhaps Satan's forces that had infiltrated their new land.
They were looking for excuses. They're like, something must be up. It must be the witches.
Yeah. And it's kind of like we were talking about on Gabby Dunn's podcast, Bad with Money, that sometimes when things are going awry, people start looking for an excuse for things. And that's where conspiracies start coming in. Where that's where
or
stuff
loss
like
of control.
Yeah.
It's the loss of and needing to be in control, and the only way you can be in control is if you can actually like grasp something and go, I know what's going on.
Yeah.
I can wrap my head around this.
Totally. You got to place the blame on something else that's tangible. So that's how stuff like QAnon comes up, or like mass hysteria, Salem Witch Trials kind of comes into play. So then these trials started from 1692, 1693. Like we said, about 200 people were suspected. This is what's crazy. One man named Giles Corey was pressed to death.
Huh?
Oh boy. That's horrible.
I'm pretty sure, I think it's like death by crushing.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
I think it was the one time that they did it.
Jeez. I mean, that's like stoning people, like being stoned to death. Like, it's
God dang it. What are
Yeah. So it looks like they placed stone. Yeah, it looks like they placed stones on top of him until.
oh my God.
horrible.
So it wasn't people, it
Horrible.
was stones that they just kept. Yikes.
Well, were
see.
people putting the stone? People were putting them on them.
In this process, prisoners were stripped naked and heavy boards were laid on their bodies. Then rocks or boulders were laid on the plank of wood. This was
my
the process
God.
of being pressed.
This unimaginable. Unimaginable.
Yeah, until they just like explode. Crazy. And again, so how people were accused of witchcraft, quote unquote witchcraft, were crazy. The evidence was just quote unquote spectral evidence. So if someone said they thought someone was a witch, then it was just indisputable in court.
That's crazy. People are crazy.
When they would go on the stand, the things like, or people would be like, I saw her doing this, and then it would be like, no, I didn't, and then there would be no evidence, no anything, and it would just kind of be taking people at their word.
Yeah, and that's called spectral evidence. So if someone was like, I saw Sarah Good appear in my room and do witchcraft, and then the jurors and the judge were like, okay, we're gonna hang her. Like it doesn't.
What were the trials even for? Like, one
exactly
can't defend yourself.
Yeah, there was.
Did
no
anyone
defense.
get off? Like, did anyone not get hanged that was accused?
Yes,
and
but only because the trials ended, which I'll get to that in a second. The trials ended for a kind of interesting reason.
Ooh.
Interesting.
There was also what was called witch cakes. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting was that the witches, the quote unquote witches, weren't even the ones who were doing witchcraft. it was actually like the Puritans who were kind of doing like spells and old folk magic in order to find out who the witches were. So they made the Puritans made these things called witch cakes. And they would do it to ward off evil spirits and try to find out who the witches were. So, and it was a way to discover and find witchcraft. So from what I know, they would make a cake from rye, and then anyone who was said to be like possessed by a witch or like afflicted, like the young girls who were like having like the seizures and hiding and being crazy, they would have them pee onto the cake. And then they would and then they would feed the cake to the dog, and then the dog would like sniff out who a witch was.
What would the dog do?
And then whoever I guess the dog went to, they would say like is a witch.
Ew. This is crazy. Who made this up? Who made this up?
It's wild.
Like some psycho. Like it was just like an old wives' tale, which you could easily say is a spell, a quote unquote spell that these people are doing. Like
they were doing the spells the whole time.
Yeah, accuse.
But the difference is they're not working for the devil. They feel they're working for God.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Then there was also what they called a touch test, is another form of evidence where if the victim was having a fit, like one of their fits, and then they called in the believed witch, and if the believed witch touched the person who was having the fit, and if the fit stopped, then that meant that the person was a witch.
Oh my God.
But of course, these people were obviously faking it. So then they would call in whoever they wanted to be the witch, and then they would just stop when they were touched. So basically, it was whoever they wanted to be like killed or excommunicated in the town.
People in the 1600s were stupid as hell.
Yes. Also, some other forms of quote unquote evidence. If people were into palmistry or horoscopes, if they had like herbs in their house or things like that, or what they called a witch's teat, which were moles or blemishes. I am covered in moles and blemishes, so I would have been
a witch.
Out. I'm
Burn
a witch.
the witch.
Where did that come from? Like the putting moles and witches together in the same
I don't know.
world.
Let's see. Origin of witches.
Did you know, while you're looking that up, that's maybe if you have this in later, but I don't know why you would, because I think I just saw this on a trailer for the show, but that show, Where Do You Come From or whatever?
Yeah.
Who Do You Think You Are? Sarah Jessica Parker she played a witch in Hocus Pocus. They did her lineage. She's related to one of the accused witches in Salem.
Whoa.
That's very, very cool.
Wow.
So I haven't watched the episode, as I said. I just saw it on a commercial.
Spoiler
alert! Stuck
alert.
with me. It stuck with me.
Okay, I couldn't get to the origin of that. But okay, so here it talks about the swimming test. I'm on history.com, which is one of the things that we had talked about earlier that I couldn't find, but now I just found it. Swimming test, it says, as part of the infamous swimming test, accused witches were dragged to the nearest body of water, stripped to their undergarments, bound, and then tossed in to see if they would sink or float.
Obviously, you're gonna float because you don't want to die.
Yeah. According to this logic, an innocent person would sink like a stone, but a witch would simply bob to the surface.
Where does that come from? Where does that? Because they don't have a soul? Is that what they're thinking?
It was since witches were
soulless?
believed to have been spurned by the sacrament of baptism, it was thought that the water would reject their body and prevent them from submerging.
It's a lose-lose. You either drown and you're innocent.
Either way,
God.
you're fucked.
Yeah.
For
Was
example,
anyone
it says
surrounding? Oh, go ahead.
No,
sorry.
I was just going to say, for example, in 1710, the swimming test was used as evidence against a Hungarian woman named Dorko Boda, who was later beaten and burned at the stake as a witch.
Well, she was burned.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll have to ask about that.
Were people in like Boston going like, "Do you hear what they're like doing in Salem?" And they're like, "What?" And they're like,
Yeah.
"Do you think there's like were people surrounding Salem, the Salem colony, like thinking at all this was a little nutty, or was this just kind of the way it was,
Or did
maybe
nobody
there
know?
wasn't?" Yeah.
Because they didn't have Twitter back then.
Right. Well, that's another
They
thing is
didn't?
things take a long time to kind of like get to, get
Yeah.
around. But also I want to talk to Rachel about that, is that these witch trials ended up becoming kind of like international. So they spread across, the country and also internationally, like
Oh, right.
to Poland. There were also Asian American witch trials. So I definitely want to talk to Rachel about some of that as well. There was also what they called a prayer test, where they would make, and a lot of these they would say it to women who either could, who were like illiterate or who spoke a different language. They didn't speak English. They would try to make them recite a prayer or read a prayer. And then if they couldn't do it, then they were witches.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So if they like weren't good at public speaking, then that was
I would freak. Yeah. Okay. So here are the people who are found guilty and hanged. Bridget Bishop, Reverend George Burroughs, Martha Carrier, Martha Corey, Mary Eastie, Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, George Jacobs Sr., Susanna Martin, Rebecca Nurse, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, John Proctor, Anne Prudeter, William Redd, Margaret Scott, Samuel Wardwell, Sarah Wilds, and John Willard. Giles Corey was pressed. Condemned but not executed, Mary Bradbury, Rebecca Eames, Abigail Faulkner, Anne Foster, Dorcas Hoare, Abigail Hobbs, Mary Lacey, Mary Post, Elizabeth Proctor, and Sarah Wardwell, and some who are known to have died in jail: Lydia Dustin, Anne Foster, Sarah Osborne, Sarah Good's daughter, who is 4 years old. They accused her of being a witch and she died in jail.
Oh, what the fuck?
Yeah, and Roger Toothaker. And then here's how the trials ended. And it was because the governor's wife was eventually accused of being a witch. So things started to get crazy. Neighbors started just like accusing their neighbors of being a witch. Like imagine like you forget to take your trash cans in and it pisses off your neighbors and they're like, you're a witch. So things just start getting out of hand. So the wife of Governor Phipps in 1693 is accused of witchcraft. And the governor is like, okay, this is getting out of hand. My wife obviously can't be accused of a witch and be killed. Like, I got to put a stop to this. So he says now that spectral evidence is illegal, and he makes it harder to convict anyone of witchcraft as a crime. And so the Salem witch trials pretty much fizzle out. People who are in jail or incarcerated already awaiting their trial are freed. And everything just kind of ends, which makes you think
that's insane. That's insane.
Yeah.
It's insane. It only lasted like 9 months or something, like less than a year, right?
Yeah. Which makes you think like, okay, this was a sham. Like, obviously there is no truth to this then if all of a sudden he's like, okay, actually, never mind. It's over. What's interesting too, and maybe this is to the effect of the question you were asking earlier, is the governor, Sir William Phipps, banned any writing or publication about the witch hunt. So you weren't allowed to write books or articles about it. So a lot of people consider this to be the first cover-up in American history.
Sure.
So he did not want any of this to get out. One thing that's kind of interesting is I think it was in 1957, they started providing apologies and restitution to the families, or maybe it was 1954, restitution and apologies to the families who had been affected by the Salem witch trials.
That's crazy. Sorry we burned your great-great-great Aunt Sarah.
Are bad. So some theories that some we have talked about before and others that maybe are new. We've talked about this a bit, but actually our guest, Marilynne Roach, disputes it. We've talked about the fungus ergot before,
right? Which
can cause symptoms like delusions, vomiting, muscle spasms. It's found in rye and wheat. In 1976, Science magazine did a study saying that perhaps that's what caused the Salem witch trials, that the Salem residents were exposed to this ergot poisoning.
Well, that's what was in that French village.
Yes.
Where everyone went crazy from the bread. That was one of the theories. It was like pretty much the cause was ergot.
Yeah, exactly. However, I read on Marilynne's website, apparently you have to have very low vitamin A in order to be susceptible or something to the ergot poisoning. And she had written that based on the diets at the time, that was probably unlikely.
Oh.
So she kind of ruled that out. One of my theories is that this is just kind of an effort to purify the community that got out of hand, that people wanted, particularly the minister wanted people who weren't following, the Bible and the church to
that makes sense
somehow, leave the community, and they wanted a scapegoat for everything that was going on at the time. And this seemed to be the easiest way to do it. Also, maybe it was a feud between the Putnams and the Parises that went too far. Like the two girls kind of like had like an elementary school fight that went, out of control, and everyone started blaming each other for witchcraft, and it became some crazy mass hysteria thing. Still something we talk about today. I remember learning about the Salem witch trials in elementary school, but we'll ask Marilynne some questions about what could have caused this. Anything she's learned from her 27 years of research on the subject, as well as the Gallows Hill Project, where she found, along with some others, the site of the hangings. Let's take a quick break for announcements. Web Crawlers has a Patreon to get access to rewards, bonus episodes, shout outs, video episodes a day early, and more. Please go to patreon.com/webcrawlers. You can donate as little as $2 a month to become a patron. Also, please rate and review us on Apple Podcast, and we will read your review on our mailbag episodes. Also, Erios has a hotline. Insert jingle here. Leave us a voicemail, and we will continue to play them on our mailbag episodes. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Now we have Salem scholar and author of 6 Women of Salem, The Untold Story of the Accused and Their Accusers in the Salem Witch Trials, Marilynne Roach.
Hello.
Hi, Marilynne.
Am I unmuted? Yes.
Yeah, you're perfect.
Nice to see you in person almost.
First of all, thank you so much for coming on. I was watching a documentary last night and you were on it. I can't remember which one it was. I think it might have been on the History Channel or ID Discover or something.
Finding the site of the hanging.
Yes. Yeah, it was really exciting. What was the correlation, I guess, between all of those who were accused of witchcraft and those who were not? Were there similarities between, the mostly women who ended up being accused in the trials?
Well, actually, in 1692, just about anybody could be accused, it seemed. It really got out of hand. But most of the time, and there were not witch trials every day, every time the court sat throughout New England. But generally, most usual suspect was an older woman without a lot of male relatives to take her part should somebody, to sue the neighbor if they start making dangerous gossip about her. Or maybe they're fallen on hard times so that they'll borrow something and you're kind of tired of having them always asking for something and there's friction that way. But in 92, the richest couple in Salem were accused, and a beggar woman was accused. So,
can you tell us about the Gallows Project? Because that was pretty interesting, and also it was on Archaeology Magazine's top 10 most important discoveries, which is wild.
Well, there had been 2 conflicting local legends about where the hangings had taken place. I mean, ordinarily, it would have happened in Boston because capital crimes were tried there. But in 92, the government was being reshuffled a bit under the new charter, which we still have in the Massachusetts Archive. And because there was so many accusations in Essex County, the court went there to hear the cases. and the executions took place there in Salem. So there wasn't a regular place of execution because that was not a regular happening in town. But there were two legends as to where it took place. One, the most repeated one, was the very top of what is called Gallows Hill. It's a high place at the edge of town. And the second, less known about theory, was that it was at the bottom of the hill where there was a rocky outcrop and it was close to the road. Back in 1901, Sidney Purley, a local antiquarian who had read just about every deed and will in the courthouse, wrote an article identifying the spot with that lower legend, which I thought sounded sensible, because if you're having a public execution, it's to teach people what not to do. And you want it where people can see it, but you don't want it necessarily in someone's backyard. So this is at the edge of town. And back then there were some houses in the distance, but nobody lived right there. It was already public land. It was a town-owned common pasture, the whole hill was. And it was visible from the road to have the executions on the lower part. But if you went up the hill, it would really be out of sight of passersby unless you toiled up. And it's steep. It's still steep. So I thought it was the lower part. And in actually 1997, when I was researching my first big book on the trials, I noticed a clue in one of the court papers Purley had not noticed, saying that somebody had seen an execution from the house below the hill on the day of, it was August 19th, when some people were being hanged. It was an eyewitness account, and it was written down like within an hour of having happened. But you didn't know where that was unless you also had access, which I did, to Sidney Purley's hundreds of articles on where people lived in Salem as of 1900. His research is going back through the deeds to the 1600s. And put together, it seemed very definitely to point to the lower ledges that he thought, for other reasons, was the site. So when a number of us got together and, agreeing with Purley, thought that that spot should be preserved, cleaned up, it was a dump, practically. It had been purchased for the purpose of memorializing them by people who agreed with that second theory about the lower ledges. But nothing had ever been done with it, and it was just vacant looking, and people would dump things, and trash would blow onto it. And the people who actually lived in Salem, which I don't, would actually go and pick up trash at this point. So she got a number of people together, and we put all the research together. A geologist at the local college did ground penetrating radar, non-invasive stuff. It really, really seemed to point to that spot. And let's see, the University of Virginia did a computerized mapping project that was unavailable in 1997, much less 1901, to show what people would see from certain vantage points that you can't see now because there's buildings in the way. But it had to be that spot. And when we took it to the city of Salem, hoping they wouldn't think this was just another, Halloween touristy thing, they were very much in favor of actually putting a memorial there, which was done. It's a nice landscape design with the names of the people who died there. And the city-owned land is definitely for that purpose now. And it was dedicated with a very nice ceremony. It was just mostly local people who had been involved, and a lot of descendants of the people who had died there. So it was very nice and fitting, and it was nice for Archaeology magazine to mention.
Wow, that's such an incredible discovery. We had a question also, were people mainly hung, or were there also burnings? Because I remember learning in elementary school that there was burnings at the stake, but we didn't come across that at all during our research.
No, that was Europe.
Okay.
Witchcraft in England and the English colonies was not anymore, was a felony, and felons were hanged.
Okay. Now, you did, tell me if this is correct, 27 years of research for
that
your book.
Yeah. It
Which
turned out that way. Well, my first draft of that first book I did was everything I could find, was based on sources in print. And then I discovered all of the scholarly riches that are in the state archives. And I realized that there were all these unpublished manuscripts. Mostly I saw them on microfilm. Hard on the eyes, but I was hot on the trail here. And I had to go through all those, and it really set the scene more in the period and everything else that was going on. So it took 27 years, yes. But that started in 1975 or 76 with the bicentennial of the Revolution, when a lot of local history was remembered and reconstituted and people started paying attention to it. So it started then, and I'm still finding out new things and working on the subject.
Wow.
It's not letting me go.
It has a spell on you. It says on your website, the turning point was discovering the collections of the manuscripts in the Massachusetts archives that told what else was going on at the same time and put the stresses of the witch scare in better context. So what, obviously, I'm sure there's a million things, but what else kind of was contributing to the frenzy, do you think?
Oh, well, people were really on edge. And I think that once they thought that there was evil magic afoot, that was just the last straw. But the English colonies were at war with Canadian colonies, French Canada. There were raids from the Native American tribes who allied with the French. Of course, the Native American tribes had reasons of their own to resent population pressures with the frontier settlements that kept spreading out. There was that. There had been some horrific in one sense and efficient, maybe for the other side, attacks on New York and Maine, New Hampshire, where people were killed, captured, and so on, towns burned. So there was that. There was occasional smallpox cropping up. There wasn't a real full-blown epidemic at that time, but there had been in the past, and you don't know it isn't going to happen until it's over and hasn't happened. Really. There were some cases. There were pirates. The war between France and England meant that there were privateers from each side preying on the ships of the other guy's side. So the fishermen and the maritime trade was very important to the economy. They'd get captured, they'd be held for ransom. If they really went far out into the Atlantic and to trade with Europe, they could get caught by Barbary pirates and sold in slavery in Northern Africa and have to be ransomed by their relatives, or their churches would take up a collection. There weren't a lot of that, but it was a constant possibility. So they're nervous about that too. There had been pirates. There was a piracy case that went to the courts a few years before. But the war was the big thing. And as Mary Beth Norton's book, In the Devil's Snare, which was published the same year as mine, as she pointed out in detail, there were a lot of people who had been directly involved and influenced by, well, they'd been in towns that had been attacked and burned, and they escaped with their lives. So the refugees in Massachusetts, and the possibility that some of them would have had post-traumatic stress syndrome, which sounds likely considering what wars do. That's a possibility, but there's a lot of economic impact with that too, which affects everyone. And of course, as I might have said, we had a charter that's still in existence, but that didn't arrive until May of 1692. So Massachusetts, which had lost its legal reason to be here and rule itself, was waiting to see what the changing British government, because there was a revolution over there, what they were going to allow them to do as far as self-rule went. So do we own our own land? Do we have any say in anything other than who's going to catch the local pig catcher? Or do we get to have a legislature or what? And they weren't sure yet what was in the charter. They knew one had just been granted, but they didn't know what was in it until it arrived in May. So that was another.
Maria had asked a good question earlier. Did surrounding colonies and cities or other places know what was going on in Salem during these trials? And did they have any perspective or ideas or, opinion of what was going on?
Yeah. Well, Salem is the center of it. And Salem Village, which is the rural end of town, separate town now, but it was the rural end of town where it really started. That was the center of it, but the panic kind of spread outward. The fairly well-off town of Andover, which is somewhat to the north, actually had more suspects arrested than did Salem before this was over. And there were people in other towns, sort of the usual suspect people would wonder about. And the trials, of course, were on the province level. It was held in Salem because of the numbers of people who had to show up at court. And that's the county town, it still is, for trials. But so all of Massachusetts was aware of it, Eastern Massachusetts, especially because that's where everything seemed to be going wrong. Maine was actually part of Massachusetts then, and that was mostly affected by the attacks, so that there were only a couple of towns left that were not burned out. New Hampshire was just along the seacoast then, which is a very short seacoast now, but they're aware of it. That's a different government. Rhode Island and Connecticut. Rhode Island stayed calm. There were a few cases in Connecticut, and the upper house of the legislature there's pretty much put the trials on the ends of the trials. There were only 4 people involved that were accused there. Put it on hold until they saw just how bad things went in Massachusetts. And New York was aware of it because some of the people who were jailed in Massachusetts escaped and made their way to New York, and they were not extradited. They were kind of waiting to see what kind of a mess people in Massachusetts were going to do next, and feeling somewhat superior to the government and the people. And, well, everything was going wrong that summer. Not that everybody thought that's what was going on, but enough so that that's what was going on.
Yeah. Whoa, that's really
And eventually there was enough opposition so that they paused by the end of the summer. October is a big month for tourism in Salem now because of Halloween.
Yeah.
Halloween is fun, but it's not what was happening then at all. That was the quiet month then. They stopped what they were doing. There had been quite a few executions in September and a lot of trials. And then they put a pause to it to rethink what was going on, because the more people who were accused, arrested, and questioned and so on, the more suspects were named. It just seemed it was perpetuating itself. So they put a stop to it temporarily. The governor wrote to England to say, once their majesties tell me what to do, I'll do it. But right now we want to pause because this isn't working. No. And by the way, it's not my fault, he said. Then there would have been more trials and executions in November, but they decided they were going to just end that court and wait to hear from England. Over the winter, there was a lot of people still in jail. The jails are not built to hold a lot of people or anybody for a long time. There's bills for firewood, so they weren't totally bereft of heat, but there wasn't enough of it. And the sanitation in those days would have been a bucket. So people were dying from natural causes. And there were petitions from their families to let them out on bail. We'll bring mother back in the spring when you hold court, but really, can she stay home all winter? Pretty much what the petitions boiled down to. So they did have more trials in January in Salem for Essex County, like county by county. But the court was not to pay attention to spectral evidence, which was the big problem, because someone who is bewitched thinks they're bewitched, is perhaps convinced themselves they were bewitched. Some of them saw or thought they saw hallucinations or visions or specters of a witch spirit coming after them and hurting them, because I think they were feeling actual aches and pains from psychosomatic reasons. At least some of them, some of the time. So they can see it, and some of the if there's more than one person being afflicted at the same time, they verify each other's description of what's going on, but no one else can. So you're kind of taking their word for it. And from the beginning, the ministers and others pointed out that you cannot believe visions like that because it's probably the devil's delusion that to make things worse, possibly there's a real witch doing these things, but you cannot be certain of it because the devil and his minions can falsify the appearance of somebody you know, for example, your suspect. And even a good person, even a very saintly person. So you never know when it's real or not. So don't take that as evidence. Don't play into the devil's hands. And of course, that's what they were doing, if only metaphorically, all summer long. And once that was kicked out of court, you really couldn't find people guilty.
Thank God. No pun intended. I guess my last question is to the effect of the hallucinations and things like that. You made a really interesting note on your website. People have, I think it was there was some sort of study also that, forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, that the ergot poisoning could have been a suspect for this like kind of mass hysteria and mass hallucinations. But you had kind of another idea about that, kind of saying that that's probably not the cause.
Yeah, that was published back in the 1970s when LSD was a new thing, 60s, maybe even earlier.
Yeah.
Well, ergot poisoning, which can occur, it's a fungus. It occurs naturally on mostly rye grains. And rye bread was common then because it grew better than the wheat did. So it was cheaper. More people would be eating it. There are apparently two different symptoms that ergot poisoning can take. One is the convulsions, such as the afflicted had, and the other is gangrene. And nobody reported that. And the gangrene would not occur unless there was a vitamin A deficiency. And there's been some argument, I guess, in different articles as to just how much vitamin A was in their diet available for what they had to eat. I agree that they probably had enough vitamin A so that they were not suffering from ergot poisoning. Besides the fact that I think everyone in the family would be eating from the same loaf of bread, but only one or two, or just one has a reaction to it. So it was disproven like about a month or 2 months after it was originally published. And then another opinion was published a few years later, but it's the theory that will not die.
Hopefully we can squash it now. Marilynne, thank you so much. This has been so illuminating and informative, and we feel so honored and lucky to talk to you. I know you have your book, 6 Women of Salem, which is incredible, and the Gallows Project. Is there anything else that our listeners should read of yours that would be informative?
Well, that first big one that took 27 years is, well, I didn't name it, but the publisher called it The Salem Witch Trials, a day-by-day chronicle of a community under siege, and it's a day-by-day chronological approach.
Oh,
mainly because it's the only way I could keep all the information in any kind of order.
Yeah.
And I'm working on something else now that's no publisher yet, but it's a companion volume to 6 Women of Salem. It's 6 Men of Salem.
Oh, incredible. Well, thank you so much, Marilynne. We really appreciate it, and hope you have a really great rest of the day.
Thank you.
And now we have Rachel Christ, who is Director of Education at the Salem Museum, who's going to answer some more questions for us about these Salem witch trials, how they exist today, and the development of witchcraft in popular society and history. Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for coming on. We're really, really excited. I just have like a few questions about the museum and the trials and everything like that.
Sure.
First of all, I think I got this from your LinkedIn, so I apologize in advance for being a creepy stalker. But I think it said that your senior thesis, I think it was at Clark University, was the development of the Good Witch in post-World War II America, which I found to be super interesting because now witchcraft seems to be like popular and accepted, in contrast to, this whole episode, which is on the Salem Witch Trials. Can you tell us like a little bit more about that subject and what your thesis was on?
Sure. You definitely get points for research. I saw in the email you sent earlier with some of the questions that you had the title, and I was like, how did you even find this?
I have a lot of free time.
Yeah. No, I'm impressed with your thorough research skills.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this has really been my, I guess my thing is not the academic way to say, but my area of speciality is the
We're not an academic podcast, don't worry.
Yeah. my thing, if you will, is the evolving image of the witch. And I actually just graduated from a master's program where that was my continuing focus. I was working full time and in the program full time because I'm a psychopath. So I didn't write a thesis as during my master's, but I did do some independent research, which was focused on this evolving image. Someday, hopefully, this will be a book that I will write in my ample amounts of free time. I keep saying, and my fiance keeps just laughing at me, like, yeah, okay, with all of your ample free time. But it's really a fascinating subject because I don't know about you, but I grew up obsessed with Harry Potter and, Sabrina the Teenage Witch and Wicked and all these pop culture witches. I dressed like Hermione Granger for years for Halloween.
Totally.
Yeah. And, I loved witchcraft as a child. And it wasn't until I got a little older and I was in my undergraduate program looking at, I was really into gender history, but I was like, what job am I ever going to get as a gender historian? That's a very hard field to break into. And I kind of stumbled into witchcraft history, which is really goes hand in hand with gender history. They're very closely linked. And I kind of stumbled into a job at the Salem Witch Museum, which obviously I've been here ever since. So it was all just kind of a happy accident, but I basically started at the very beginning with, okay, what is the witch historically? How is this connected to the image of a woman? Because in the early modern witch trials, anybody can be accused of witchcraft, men, women, children. But the stereotype of a witch that emerges is a woman, particularly an older woman, haggard, evil, eating children in the woods like Hansel and Gretel. So my research really started to dig into how do we get from point A, a real person being accused of witchcraft, to this stereotype, and then get to point D, where we're all the way down in the 1990s and Hermione Granger is saving the day at Hogwarts. How do all those things happen? So it's a really interesting story. My kind of personal take on it is it's very connected to the feminist movement. And that's what my thesis was about. So,
interesting.
And this is what my research has kind of continued being. So, I mean, it's kind of two things that happen at the same time. One, we have enough distance from historical witch trials by the time we get to, let's say, the 1890s that people can kind of start to play with the witch. There are people who still believe in witches, and believe it or not, there are actually instances of mob justice where people are kind of pulling their neighbors through the streets saying she's a witch, we got to kill her. That is still happening in rural places in America. But for most people, they no longer believe in witches. They no longer believe that your neighbor can put a curse on you. And because of that, witches can kind of enter pop culture in a very different way. So you start to see during the first wave of feminism, witches emerging in pop culture in places like The Wizard of Oz, which comes out in 1900, Halloween postcards. You start to see some plays that are including good witches. So witches who are perhaps beautiful, good, sympathetic characters saving the day. You see this in poems by feminists and by the time we get to like the 1910s, 1920s. And then it just keeps ramping up from there. So you get to the 60s and 70s, second wave feminism. Samantha Stevens and Bewitched emerges. You keep going, you get to the 90s, third wave feminism. There's like an explosion of witches. They're just kind of overwhelming pop culture. And it just links so closely together that it can't be an accident is essentially my thesis. So
that's so you gotta write that. That is that is so crazy. I paused and gasped a little bit because I thought you were going to say internationally. That there are some places still where people are dragging out their neighbors and being like, "You're a witch." Yeah, but I am astounded that this is happening still, like domestically in some rural places in America. Do you have any more like information on that or where that's happening or anything like that?
So I wouldn't say happening right now. When I say contemporary, I mean like the 1900s, early 1900s, late 1800s. I mean, I wouldn't say it's out of the question that there are some very rural places in America where people may believe that are very superstitious still and may believe that, your neighbor's capable of putting a curse on you. But, the episodes of mob justice where you see people being like dragged through the streets, that's still happening in like the 1890s, which is really unbelievable considering witchcraft has been decriminalized in the British colonies since the 1730s. So you got hundreds of years where you can't legally prosecute someone for witchcraft, but it's holding on in pop culture or in the popular mind to a point where people still really want to, blame misfortune on that idea of a witch.
It's such an easy cop out. Yep. On the Salem website, it talks about, which I thought was interesting, that I had no idea about, that there were Asian American witch hunts, that witch hunts extended even so far as to like Poland and internationally. If you know anything about this, like what are some of the most notable international hunts and how did this kind of like spread throughout the world?
So this is kind of a two-part answer. So witch trials, in the definition of a witch being a person who is capable of having supernatural powers and bringing harm to someone through those powers, whether they're getting the powers from the Christian devil, whether they're getting their powers from another supernatural force. That's something that you see in many, many cultures across the world. So sadly, there are still witch hunts going on in Africa today where, which are particularly targeting children, which is really upsetting. I don't claim to be an expert in those witch hunts, but we did do an event at our museum a couple of years ago with an organization that's working to combat those witch hunts. And that's really, really dark stuff. There were witch trials that took place all across Europe during the early modern period. So jumping back to the time when witch hunts are happening, kind of across the board throughout Europe. So witch hunts in Poland, there were witch hunts in Russia, there were witch hunts in England and Scotland and Germany, which at the time is the Holy Roman Empire. You see kind of concepts similar to the witch in places in South America. But it's kind of hard to categorize them as a witch because a witch is, kind of a European concept. It's a different religion, a different set of beliefs. But then separately, there's also the idea of a witch hunt. And that's something we really focus on at our museum. The last thing our visitors see when they leave our museum is something we call a witch hunt wall, which presents a formula for witch hunts. So that formula is fear plus a trigger equals a scapegoat. And we break that down in the context of the Salem Witch Trials. But then we also offer 3 contemporary examples that fit that formula. So we talk about Japanese internment. So Japanese Americans being scapegoated after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. We talk about the McCarthy blacklists. So blacklisting people as communists during the 50s. And then the AIDS epidemic being blamed on the gay community in the 1980s. So referring to Asian American witch hunts, we're doing a program in August, which I'm sure is where you got that verbiage from. We're doing a program about witch hunts against Asian Americans, but witch hunts being the formula. So different the Asian American, Asian immigrants being scapegoated throughout our country's history, which the really dark part of this presentation is we were planning on really focusing just on Japanese internment because that's a part of our museum and that's something we really wanted to dig into. But in doing the research, it turns out, and I shouldn't be surprised by this information, that Asian Americans have been treated this way since they got here, this kind of tendency to scapegoat. And it's the same mentality we see during witch trials. You're different from me in some way, so I'm going to blame everything that's wrong on you because it's easier than really addressing the problem. So, and we just see this swell to a kind of apex during the internment during World War II, but it was going on long before World War II, and it has gone on consistently since then, as we're seeing, unfortunately, right now.
Yeah. Wow. So your museum really educates on a wide variety of subjects and injustices and finds a way to kind of tie it back to this formula that happened during the Salem witch trials, which is really cool. I wasn't going to ask this question, but now I'm kind of interested. It's an easy one, but is the population that comes to the museum, is it children in schools who are doing the tour? Is it mostly tourists, or who mostly comes through?
It's a really wide variety, which is really kind of neat. It's a really great opportunity. We get school groups, kids in elementary school up through high school, up through college. We get families who are just on vacation in Salem. So, mom, dad, 2 kids, 3 kids. We get international visitors. People come here from all over the world in normal times, and we're trying to get back there now. We have our presentations translated into 7 different languages. We haven't figured out a way to pull that off with COVID precautions because we were giving people physical headsets, and now we have to figure out a way to do that in a way that is, COVID safe. But that is for specifically the international visitors. And domestic visitors as well. But it was kind of created with those international visitors in mind. And we get, college students who are just excited to be in Salem and, like we were talking about at the beginning, love Hermione Granger and Hocus Pocus, and they want to come here and dress like a witch and things like that. And that's okay. The kind of cool part about Salem is people come for the stereotypical witch. Oftentimes they come for Halloween and for the pop culture witch, but they come through places like our museum and they get this whole other perspective on witchcraft history. And they leave, ideally, if we do our job correctly, with this kind of widened perspective on what the image of a witch is and what this history is and why it's still so important to us today.
Yeah, 100%. I've been to Salem once. I somehow missed the museum, but I'm going to have to go again. My last question is, living in Salem, do you find, this is an obscure question, that there's a heavy energy, or do you feel any kind of leftover darkness or residual?
Leftover darkness.
Leftover darkness. But do you feel any kind of leftover presence from the trials? That's a weird question, but
it's actually not. I get asked questions like that a lot in interviews, so don't feel weird. Okay. So I don't actually live in Salem. I live in Beverly, which is just across the bridge. It's interesting. I don't feel any sort of dark presence here. I feel kind of, it's hard to describe, but especially our assistant education director and myself have been working on this project over the past couple of years, which is packets for descendants. So for people who can trace their ancestry to someone involved in the Salem Witch Trials. So basically, this has just been our opportunity to do a deep dive on everything we know about these individual people. We started with the 20 individuals who were executed, and now we're expanding the project to the accusers, people who were accused and survived, the people who died in jail, and so on. And this is a project that's going to go on for the rest of our lives. But it's been a really interesting opportunity to just think about these people in terms of them being real people. It's sometimes, especially when we're talking about witchcraft history, we kind of think of, it's the supernatural, right? It's ghosts and magic and flying on broomsticks and stuff. But it's not at the end of the day. These are just real people who unfortunately were targeted in the way that people are targeted today. They were victims of a mass hysteria, mass panic, which we're still seeing happening right now. So it's not that I feel like their ghosts are around us, but I do feel like Once we really start to think of them, I feel like I carry them with me in a way. And everybody who studies the Salem Witch Trials, I think, starts to feel that way. And once you really start to examine who they are as people, you really start to feel the trials in a different way. And I definitely feel that walking around in Salem. I can't speak to others who are not doing this weird, crazy deep dive into these people's lives, but
no, for sure. And also, I think you're probably doing a huge service to both the accusers and the accused in like kind of honoring them and telling their stories and helping them to move on should they're, still be there or, whatever it is, honoring their legacy. So that's great. The reason for this episode was because someone called in and left us a voicemail that they were related to someone who was hung during the Salem Witch Trials. So we have to revisit that and see. We should connect you guys. I don't know. Maybe you've done their packet. I don't. But that would be interesting. Rachel, thank you so much for all this information. This was so incredible. And if people want to find you online, if you want to be found or visit the museum or read any of your work or anything like that, where can people reach you?
The Salem Witch Museum's Facebook page or Instagram page. I run both. My
Amazing.
email is also all over our website. So if you have any questions about the Salem Witch Trials, you can always feel free to shoot me an email and I will answer your questions to the best of my ability. But following us on social media is really the best way to stay in touch with what we're doing, what you can expect to see in the future, special events, things like that. And both of those, our Facebook and Instagram, are just at Salem Witch Museum.
So if you know anything else about the Salem Witch Trials, if you happen to be related to anyone who was in the Salem Witch Trials, if you are a Salem Witch Trials historian, or if you are a practicing witch today and feel any effects from these trials, or if you live in Salem, I've been there once and it was so cool. But also the whole time I did not get cell phone service, which is kind of interesting.
Interesting.
Very interesting. Spooky. Melissa, where can people reach us?
You can email us at webcrawlerspod@gmail.com.
I'm Allie Siegel.
I'm Melissa, not a witch, Stettin.
And I'm producer Kitchen Witch Blasucci, and I say it again, I love kitchen witchery. I think it's so fun.
All right. Bye. Don't forget to make your urine cakes.
Yeah.
An Erios original.
Powered by Acast.